Alright, so today we're going to be starting with cellular energy and specifically looking at the relationship between photosynthesis and cell respiration, which are two of the main energy processes in all living things. Here's a list of the objectives. Before you start the video, make sure you read over them. That way they're sort of in the back of your mind as you are going through the lecture. At the end of the lecture, you want to revisit them. Make sure you can answer all four of them. Then you will have met the needs and the objective of this lecture. Okay, so we know all living things need energy, and when we say all living things, we mean all of them. Plants, fungi, obviously animals, including humans, because you are an animal, even bacteria, so prokaryotic, eukaryotic, doesn't matter. Where do we get that energy from? Well, there's a conversion process. However, the energy comes from glucose, and remember that is a monosaccharide of carbohydrates. How do living things get their glucose? Well, it depends on what of the two categories that the living thing falls under. If they are autotrophic, okay, we have the word auto there. Oops, sorry. We have the word auto here. Auto meaning self. Okay, they are able to make their own glucose, and they will do this by absorbing energy from sunlight. Okay, for example, plants. There are also other sources that they can absorb energy from to make glucose, but we're not going to be covering that now. That's more of an advanced concept. Heterotrophs, on the other hand, which are like us, we get our glucose by consuming other organisms. So either we eat other animals that have eaten plants that have made their glucose, or we can directly eat plants as well. Okay, think about a salad and a burger. You have a mixture of plant and animal matter there that we are consuming. Both of them are going to give us their supply of glucose. What do we use the glucose for? Well, the energy that we extract from it will be used to do all of our cellular work. Okay, for example, we have mechanical work here. For example, the sperm cell needing motion. Okay, we're going to have to expel energy for that one. Transport, when we're going to actively pump materials across the membrane, we're going to need an input of energy there. And any sort of chemical work. For example, the use of enzymes in chemical reactions if it requires an input of energy. So those are just three examples. We also use it in the place of making proteins when we need to put energy into that, and as well as cell reproduction like mitosis and meiosis. Okay, but glucose, even though it seems like a small molecule, it's actually very big and it holds a lot of energy. So to break down glucose all at one time would be releasing all of that energy all at once, and that would not be very efficient. Instead, we're going to break down the glucose molecule and convert it into another energy molecule. This one is much smaller and reusable, and we know this molecule already as ATP. Okay, if you remember, ATP is a nucleic acid. Okay, here, let me get that pen going here. Okay, remember it is a nucleic acid. All right, you see we have our amino group here, we have the ribose, and then we have three phosphate groups attached. ATP, standing for adenosine triphosphate. So the tri obviously meaning 3. Okay. ATP is reusable because we can charge it up and break it down and charge it up and break it down back and forth. The way we're going to do that is by the removal of a phosphate group. So now instead of ATP, we have ADP as a molecule. And you can see there the diphosphate, 2 phosphate groups. We've removed one. So when we want to store energy, we'll start with an ADP molecule, and we will add on a 3rd phosphate group. Okay? See the energy being stored as the 3rd phosphate group is added. That bond is considered very high energy, and that's where we're going to store most of the energy until we need it. Okay? Once we have ATP stored, we can release the energy. Okay? The way we're going to release energy is by breaking it down. So now we have all of that energy stored in that bond right here between the second and the third phosphate group. We're going to rip that third phosphate group off. It's going to be singular, okay? It's going to just, float out into the cytoplasm. And that releases the energy. So now that energy can go to do whatever cellular work it is that we're looking for. Okay? Cells store energy by adding that phosphate back on. So we go back and forth between this conversion between the ADP molecule and the ATP molecule. And think of the ADP molecule sort of as an empty container just sitting open, okay? It is waiting to store something in it. So then you put the lid on top of it, that would be like your phosphate group, okay? And whatever you've put inside of it, that is your energy and it is being stored. So you can go back and forth between the conversion of the ATP molecule and the ADP molecule, and that's actually extremely efficient for the cell. So it's like recharging a battery. ATP is useful, but we don't want to store large amounts of energy long term. Okay, it's sort of like quick spending. It's there, boom, and then it gets used. However, if we are, making a lot of energy and we want to store it longer, then we're going to store it in our glucose molecule. Okay, and remember when we talk about storage in animals, we're going to store our glucose as glycogen. Remember, that's the polysaccharide. And then in plants, we're going to store it as starch molecules. Okay, so both glycogen and starch are polysaccharides. In other words, they are long chains of glucose molecules, and that's how we're going to hang on to it until we need it. Once we need the energy, then we will take and convert a glucose molecule into, ATP so it can be spent. That's kind of hard to understand, so here's an easy analogy for you. Everybody knows money, right? Okay, imagine you have a single dollar in your pocket. All right, you leave that single dollar there, that's sort of like your glucose molecule. It has all of this energy and all of this spending potential locked inside of it. Okay, whereas ATP molecules would be like changing out the dollar for a bunch of coins. Is it easy to spend a nickel a quarter at a time? Yes. In order to spend that nickel or the quarter, are you getting rid of the entire dollar's worth of spending money? No, you're just doing it piece by piece. And so that allows that dollar to last a little bit longer. Okay? All right, so let's go back to autotrophs and heterotrophs and look at how this happens. Autotrophs are going to be absorbing energy from the sunlight. They're going to make glucose from that energy, and then they're going to take that glucose and convert it into ATP for the cell's use. Heterotrophs, we skip the sunlight, okay? We do not absorb sunlight energy. Instead, we're going to consume our glucose. And then once we have it inside, we will then convert it directly for our cells to use. Okay, well, we have a name for these two processes. Okay, autotrophs are going to use photosynthesis in order to convert the energy of sunlight into glucose. Okay, and then both autotrophs and heterotrophs are going to use cell respiration to take that glucose energy, break it down, and turn it into ATP so we have cellular use. This is a really big, important topic here, okay? I guarantee you will probably see a short answer kind of essay question that asks you to compare. And 9 times out of 10 students miss this. They always say, oh, autotrophs perform photosynthesis, whereas heterotrophs perform cell respiration. That's not true, okay? Very important. Plants will do both, photosynthesis and cell respiration. Heterotrophs, just cell respiration. Okay, so special star on that one. All right, so let's take a quick peek at these two processes. We're going to get the big picture in this lecture, and then in subsequent lectures, we'll go into the nitty-gritty details of photosynthesis and cell respiration. Be lucky this is only 9th grade biology because photosynthesis and cell respiration have many, 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 many steps, and we're going to simplify it down as much as we can. So consider that when we go into detail, we're not even anywhere close to the true amount of detail. All right, so we can look at photosynthesis as an equation. Okay, the way we discovered this were a series of experiments that were done over time. You can read about them in your textbook if you want. You know, how we discovered these were the reactants and the products that were necessary. But basically, here's the idea. Plants take in carbon dioxide and water, and then they use the energy from light to produce glucose and oxygen, okay? Of these two products, glucose is our main product. Oops, I'm sorry. Glucose is our main product. Oxygen is just a released product. It's not the intent. It's not the product we're trying to make here, okay? Glucose is the one that we're going to be focusing on. How do plants take in carbon dioxide? Well, we're going to get into that a little bit more, but they have these specialized cells on their leaves. They're called stomata, and that's going to allow them to take in carbon dioxide. And plants also will take in water through their roots. So between the roots and the leaves, that's how we're going to get these materials into the cell. And light energy will be absorbed. Okay, so just looking at the breakup here, these are going to be our chemical reactants down here. We have 6 carbon dioxide molecules and 6 water molecules. Then we're going to add some light energy. We're going to absorb that into the chloroplast. And our our products are going to then be glucose, which actually I want to put that equation on here for you. Glucose is C6H12O6. Okay, so we'll have glucose and then 6 oxygen molecules. Okay. So as we said, the main site of photosynthesis is going to be happening in the chloroplast, right? And specifically, there are structures within the chloroplast that are called thylakoids. Each one of these little guys here is a thylakoid. So you see we have many, many, many stacks of them. These thylakoids are wrapped in a membrane where photosynthesis can occur, and they are found within the chloroplast. So we have the outer membrane, of the chloroplast, and then the red is trying to show the inner membrane of the chloroplast. But in addition to that, here is where we have all of the photosynthesis activity occurring. Okay, so each one of these little stacks, they kind of remind me of like Mentos candies. I don't know if you know what that is, or maybe you could even say like checkers. Okay, if you stack checkers one on top of the other, each checker would be like a thylakoid. Okay. Now, the chloroplast structure is so important. All right, these thylakoid membranes being stacked one on top of the other, because it plays a role in increasing the surface area. If the membrane is where photosynthesis happens, we want photosynthesis happening a lot inside plant cells. And so by wrapping each thylakoid and making multiples in multiple stacks in each chloroplast, that's going to increase the surface area for the membrane, which is going to allow more of those reactions to occur across the membrane. Therefore, we're increasing the amount of the product, glucose, that we are making. So, big theme here, structure dictates function. We've seen this before, okay? Big star. In the chloroplast, it is the thylakoid membrane increasing surface area so that we can increase its function, which is to produce glucose for the plants. Okay. Cell respiration is going to look a little bit different. So once we have that glucose, whether we've made it because we are plants or whether we've eaten it because we are, heterotrophic organisms, we're going to use glucose, we're going to take in some oxygen, and then we're going to make these products, the carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Okay, and that energy again is in the form of ATP. So we are releasing the energy through a series of energy extracting reactions. In other words, we're taking that glucose molecule and breaking it down bit by bit, okay, taking a little bit of change from that dollar, a little bit at a time, and making these ATP molecules. And remember, both plants and animals, okay, autotrophs and heterotrophs alike, need to perform cell respiration in order to survive. So when we look at this, we see our reactants here. Okay, we've got the reactants, they're over here. Okay, reactants, glucose and oxygen. They're going to go into our organelle, which is our site of respiration, the mitochondria. And what we're going to produce are water and carbon dioxide. They're sort of like the side product. Okay, they generally get used as waste. But our main goal here was to produce these ATP molecules. Once we have the energy transformed into ATP, we're going to be able to do all sorts of cell work, as we had mentioned before. Okay. So this is happening inside the mitochondria. Much like the chloroplast, the mitochondria has many specialized structures, and we'll get into more of those as we get into the details of cell respiration. But you'll see there's an outer membrane and an inner membrane, and the inner membrane has these distinctive folds, okay, and they're called cristae, and it is across this membrane that we are going to be able to make our actual ATP. So for all of the energy extracting reactions, the one that occurs where we make the ATP is going to happen across this inner membrane. Hopefully that has you thinking again, structure dictates function. Here we see something very similar to what happened in the chloroplast, except instead of having multiple thylakoids with extended membranes, we've taken the inner membrane, and by looping it like this, we've been able to increase the surface area as well. If the inner membrane were just a simple oval, it would have 3 times less surface area actually. So it has increased significantly. And again, the purpose of that is because we want to increase the output of the product we are making here, which is ATP. So structure dictates function. Very, very important for both the chloroplast and the mitochondrion. I guarantee you will see that as a short answer or essay question on an upcoming exam. So when we look at the photosynthesis equation, we have carbon dioxide, water, and energy. In this case, it's in the form of light. Energy is going to be used to make glucose and oxygen. And then let's look at cell respiration. Glucose and oxygen are then the reactants, which are used to make carbon dioxide, water, and energy, which in this case is ATP. Do you notice anything uncanny about those equations? Exactly, they're complete opposites. So what's really important to see here is you could sum this up by saying the products of photosynthesis become the reactants of cell respiration. And so even though these are 2 different forms of cell energy conversion, they're extremely linked to one another because the products of one become the reactants of the other. All right. And here's just a diagram to sort of stress that a little bit more. And I want to use a word here. Okay, I want you to think about the word interdependence. Okay, photosynthesis and cell respiration have such a strong relationship that they depend on one another. Obviously, we're talking about in plant cells here because we do not photosynthesize, but these reactants for cell respiration, oxygen and glucose, the plant has to go through photosynthesis first in order for those to become reactants in respiration. And then we make the ATP energy, and that gets spent on whatever cell process we need to go through, protein synthesis, movement, whatever. And then those byproducts, carbon dioxide and water, they actually are going to go back and allow photosynthesis to occur again. Now, it's very important to note that plants take in much more CO2 than they give off. Let me write that up here. Okay, important concept there to understand. It's not extremely completely balanced, so there will be more CO2 coming in compared to what they're giving off during respiration. So there's an imbalance. And we're also going to be looking at an activity where we talk about the role of carbon as it cycles through plants, animals, and the ecosystem. And you can see how a balance of carbon dioxide within our atmosphere is going to be very important, and the very specialized role that plants play in our carbon movement. Okay? So that is the end. Make sure you swing back to those objectives. Check them out, and if you have any questions, always feel free to email me or catch me in class. All right.